welcome everyone to the first episode of our Let's Build series, where we take popular characters from movies and TV shows and turn them into character rigs that we can use to animate. So like always, we're a little late to the party, but I just finished watching Squid Game on Netflix, and I thought it would be fun to take the worker design and turn it into a rig. Just to reiterate, I'm not a rigger. I kind of just like to play around in Toon Boom, so this might work, it might not work, but let's see what we can make. The first thing I need is a character turnaround, right? I need it as a guide when I rig all my different views. So let's head into Sketchbook and make that turnaround. So here's a trick I use when I want to make a quick character turnaround. Instead of trying to figure out all the anatomy, how to line up every single part of the body, did a quick Google search for just a generic character turnaround, and I used that as a reference. So I knocked down the opacity and I literally traced the details of my character over my reference image. And this just makes sure that all my body parts are lined up and I don't even have to think about it. Right, the focus of this exercise wasn't to practice my drawing skills, I just wanted to get to the animation and rigging part as fast as I could. Right, so the guide is done. Now I can import it into Toon Boom and we can actually start rigging. Taking the turnaround that we made in Sketchbook, I imported that into Toon Boom and I'm going to be referring to that as I create my rig. So I decided to start with the head because I felt the hood and the mask interacting was going to be the most complex part of this rig. Although I didn't start with a rig template, I did have a plan of how I wanted to tackle this rig. So my plan was to start with the most complex parts first, like the head and the hood, and then move on to the body, the arms, and the legs afterwards. So once I had how many pieces I needed for the head planned out, I started to draw my artwork. So here, I had to make sure that my line art was going on the line art layer, and my color art was going on the color art layer. So actually what you're seeing right now is I'm actually drawing on just my color art layer, so I didn't notice that I was doing this, so afterwards I go back and cut my line art and put it on the line art layer and leave my color art on the color art layer. So every rigging video I've seen, they kind of say it's just good practice to get into this habit. The hood and the mask were pretty straightforward, they were just solid pieces of art, but when it came to the opening of the hood, I decided to use a cutter to kind of cut away the solid fill. So the shape of my cutter was the same as the hood opening, and then I filled it with just a neon green placeholder color that I was going to use to cut my artwork. So once I was happy with how the artwork was turning out, I started to move the pivot points. So I used the advanced animation tool to permanently move where the pivot points were, and then if I wanted to have the same pivot information, I would just copy and paste that information from each element. And I think one of the most difficult things about the head was getting the cutters to work properly. What really helped was using the line art and color art nodes. This way I could keep those elements separate when I was doing the cutting. So I could have my line art still on top, but my color art would be used as the cutter. So I guess that's one of the reasons why it's a good idea to keep those two elements on separate layers. The last step was to add deformers around all of the pieces because it is a 360 rig, so you want to have that freedom. And fortunately, Toon Boom has a very, very useful tool that basically auto creates these deformers for you. So it saves a lot of time and it's actually very, very accurate. So I use that for most of the pieces, and then if I needed to adjust or tweak a deformer, I would go in and manually do that.
Well, actually, the last thing I did was create the details for the mask, and the way this was rigged, it's basically the same as rigging an eye. So if you think of the mask as the eye white, and the details as the pupil, you cut them the exact same way.
So we just finished the head, and it wasn't as difficult as I thought because there's no features. There's no mouth, there's no eyes, so that made it very, very straightforward, right? The hardest part was making sure the details cut into the mask. Now, the body is going to be very similar to how we rigged the mask, so we don't really need to spend too much time on that. What I want to do is jump right to the arms, because that's probably going to be a little bit more difficult.
So to make the arms, I started off with a simple rectangle, which I bent into shape using my guide. So for the joints, I use a circle to map out where I want my pivot point for my elbow to be. I'll then split that one piece into my upper and lower arm, and then I'll match my peg pivot points with that circle to get a seamless rotation. I actually wasn't as accurate as I should have been with these elbow joints. In the end, they didn't line up as perfectly as they should have. But since both pieces of the arm are going to be covered in an envelope deformer, it wasn't really a big deal. The second challenge of the arm was doing something that's called a cross auto patch. So all a cross auto patch does is when your pieces of your arm are layered in Z depth, it keeps that smooth transition from the lower arm and the upper arm. The problem was I just forgot how to do it, so I had to spend, a few minutes looking at another tutorial to kind of refresh my memory. The rest of the arm was pretty straightforward. I decided to do a sleeve and a wrist just to give animators a little bit more control when posing out this character. And off camera, I added a whole bunch of other drawing substitutions for the hand.
We just finished the arms, and I know there's so many different ways to rig an arm, but I guess it comes down to what you need for the show, for talking about it in a studio context, or what your personal preference is as a rigger. The nice thing about Toon Boom is you don't have to rig the arm twice. You can rig it once, duplicate those nodes, flip them, and use a static transformation to keep that position. It's a huge, huge time saver. I'm not sure if Toon Boom has a symmetry tool, but I think that would be pretty helpful. We have the head, the body, and the arms done. We just need the lower half, and then we'll be off to the races.
So by this point in the rigging process, I really felt like I had a rhythm down, because the steps to rig each piece were basically the same with just a few different tweaks. But after I planned out what details were going to go on the pelvis, like the belt and the belt hoops, rigging it was pretty straightforward. So keeping in mind what I learned from the other body parts, I basically rigged the pelvis the same way. I drew the artwork, the line art on the line art, the color art on the color art, then I went to add the peg pivots, and then finally I added my deformers. And again, that cross auto patch came in actually a lot in this rig. I used it to cut the crotch area and the pelvis itself, so the transition was seamless. It was at this stage that the rig started to really come together. I could actually see the progress I was making, which gave me a lot of motivation to keep going.
So pelvis is done. It was pretty straightforward. I think the hardest part was deciding how I was going to connect the legs and the pelvis together. I didn't want to use any cutters, so I decided to just delete the bottom line art, and there you go. For the legs, we don't really need to spend any time on those, because if you can rig an arm, you can rig a leg. It's the exact same process. So let's skip ahead to our finished front view, and then we can start creating our other views.
At this stage, we take our front view that we rigged, we use the deformers and the pegs that we put on each piece, and we match those pieces to our different views in our turnaround. I quickly realized it was hard for me to see what I was doing with my turnaround in the way, so I needed to draw on a separate layer just the outline of each view, and that helped me see a lot better. When I was moving each piece, the focus was to kind of keep the pivot points in relatively the same spot. Sometimes if you just move a piece with the deformers, the pivot point sort of gets left behind, so I had to make sure that I was moving the pegs first and then using the deformers to make smaller changes. tips at this stage is just a lot of patience, taking your time, and really thinking about the best way to move the pieces around. Now, if you're in a time crunch, you can flip your keyframes so you have both the left and right views, but that makes it a little bit harder to animate with. So since we had some extra time, I actually went in and manually repositioned each piece for the opposite view. It takes more time when you're rigging, but I think it's way more enjoyable to animate a head turn when your drawings aren't flipping. So I learned this the hard way. I made sure I dropped a keyframe before I started moving each view, because if you don't, it's going to screw up your previous views. The back view was a little tricky because some parts need to be hidden behind others, right? So it introduces Z depth, which can kind of make things a little more complicated. Just try not to move your pieces too far in Z depth and you should be fine. A good shortcut is Alt, up or down arrow, and that moves the piece like one increment.
So this is the finished rig. We have all our views keyed on the timeline. Very nice. And then as we scroll down, we have it tweened out. So of course things are going to be popping now. You're going to have to do some adjustments when you animate, but I guess, you know, you can't win it all. Have some hand drawing swaps, which are kind of nice. We probably need to add more feet drawing swaps if we're going to actually get some real animation, but we can do all that off camera. See, I'm really happy how it turned out, and I think all that's left to do is an animation test to actually see if this rig will work, and we can do that in the next video. Once this is all tested, I'll create a template, I'll put it on my Gumroad, and then you guys can download this rig for free and let me know what you think. Love to hear any feedback you guys have. So that's it, guys. I actually had a lot of fun creating this. Hopefully it shows you too that you don't have to be a rigger to make cool characters for your personal projects at home. I definitely want to keep doing videos like this. Let me know in the comments if you want to see a specific character from a specific show, and maybe we can try and build those. So this was a lot of work. I'm probably going to take a break, but that's it for now. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Happy animating.